My name is Jeremy Alan. I'm here with my co-host,
Eric Igwe.
And we're going to get into our discussion today with our guest, Alan Holmes. And so, Alan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us the people a little bit about your role with, what you do.
Okay, well, currently I'm a senior advisor for Atlanta City Council member Dustin Hillis. So this is year 5. So I'm a jack of all trades, if you will. So I do a lot of writing of legislation to address a lot of the issues of concern in the community. We have a lot of vacant homes and blight in the city council district I work in, a lot of transportation issues. We have a lot of deep poverty, but at the same time, it's one of the most rapidly gentrifying sections of the city of Atlanta. So I work on writing legislation. As you can imagine, it's a lot of issues that arise due to what's happening in the district. So I have to represent the office at many of the community meetings, take in the concerns of the community, get them back to Councilmember Hillis so we can try to address a lot of these issues. And I have a heavy marketing background, so I manage the office, MailChimp email list and assist in a lot of the content creation when Councilman Hillis is out in the community. And I do a lot of the video and just make sure that people are aware of, what he's doing up at City Hall and a lot of the legislation that he's getting passed. But I think a lot of it, too, is external affairs. So just breaking down what's happening at City Hall to the residents and just kind of letting them know this is what's happening. Yeah. Because, they can't sit through a 4-hour city council meeting because folks are at work, taking care of kids and just doing what they need to do. So I do a lot of summarizing what's happening at City Hall so the residents are looped in, because they can't make every meeting. Yeah. And then on the side, I'm a partner in a firm called Roadmap Advisors. So I have 2 business partners, Brian Hamer and Imani Terry. We all went to North Carolina A&T. So Aggie Pride.
Okay.
So,
shout out to people.
We all went to A&T. So we specialize in video production and graphic design. So we've been lucky enough to work with a lot of political candidates, nonprofits, and some businesses, but that's our wheelhouse. We really are passionate about branding political candidates, but we don't work with everybody. We want to work with folks who are passionate, but who really want to make a change. But we understand that your branding has to be clean. The video has to be clean. Just the way that you present yourself to the voters has to be authentic. So we that's kind of our wheelhouse. But I also do podcasting as well. So I have 2 podcasts I'm a part of. One is called Why Pay, and it is a podcast where we focus on reparations.
Hey.
And we interview, but our brand is we interview a lot of, like, I want to say heavyweight guests. So economists, professors, people who are very heavy within the space, because we think it's a serious topic. So we don't come at it from a perspective of we're just talking randomly about how we feel. Yeah. We want people to really take this seriously. So we bring on people who are presenting data and have a real heavy background and just making an argument for why reparations is necessary. And I have another podcast that I do solo called Hidden Lynchings. Okay. It covers race riots and lynchings in America that we were not taught about in school. So,
all right, historian.
Yeah, I did 1 season so far. I covered race riots and lynchings in Georgia, and so they're 10-minute episodes, nothing too long. But I recorded all 10 episodes ahead of time and dropped them all at once. Yeah. So I learned a lot myself, but I think given all the discussions about critical race theory and the history being banned and them not wanting, folks not wanting history to be taught in schools, I think it's very relevant. So that's some things that I'm involved in podcast-wise.
No, that's great, man. That's great. So we definitely got some things to ask you based on the experience. So let's get started with city politics in Atlanta. Tell us about, Mayor Dickens and the council, because, I don't follow as much, but I was following that race a little bit. And then, there was quite a few candidates, and there, Kasim Reed was involved, and then, but I think he didn't even make it to the runoff,
No, he
right?
didn't.
And then Mayor Dickens kind of, at least for us outside Atlanta, was like, oh, man, he came in and won, which I think maybe for the outsiders like me took us by surprise. That for him to come through and win it all. So tell us about Mayor Dickens for everyone else, right? And how the council.
Absolutely. So I had the pleasure of working with Mayor Dickens when he was a council member, because prior to becoming mayor, he served on the council for a number of years. And I think that he is the man for the job, and he's been doing well, hitting the ground running. I think that his background as an engineer, I've said this before, is going to be very helpful in Atlanta and the city addressing some of these deep, difficult problems. Because, engineers are process-oriented.
Yep.
They do things that a lot of people would say it's too hard for them to do. Engineers are trained to tackle difficult problems.
Yeah.
And working at the city of Atlanta, there are some problems that will take a lot of time to figure out. You go through the processes, right? It's not something that's just going to be changed overnight. And I think his experience as a council member, seeing the issues, but at the same time having that engineering background is going to help the city tackle some transportation problems regarding affordable housing, as well as public safety, which was one of the number one issues that he ran on. And I think, as well as the efficiency of being able to deliver city services better to constituents and taxpayers who are, that's what their taxes are helping the city run. And so I think that he has the skill set to really make a deep impact as the mayor of Atlanta. And so I think that, it's going to be tough, but I think he's up to the challenge. He's most certainly up to the challenge. And I think his one success, huge win, was that the state decided to table the legislation as it relates to the Buckhead cityhood movement, because the Buckhead residents were, a faction of the Buckhead residents were pushing to secede, if you will, and create their own city. To be clear, many people in Buckhead were opposed to this, but it's just a small faction that connected with a lot of the conservative legislators at the Capitol to even introduce the legislation.
Yeah.
And so that legislation is tabled. And so I believe that was a big part in, and, a lot of it came about because the minute that Mayor Dickens became mayor, he was working to address the public safety challenges and take them head on and really bring the city together. And so it was because of that the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor decided to table this legislation, which was huge, because if you remove that tax base from the city of Atlanta, it's going to make the budget very hard to balance. It would have been devastating. And so that's one of the early wins that I would say Mayor Dickens needs to take credit for. But again, he's continuing to tackle lots of challenges for the city.
Gotcha. So you mentioned public safety. Is there any other top issues for people outside of Atlanta, watching this, that they should say, hey, all right, if public safety is one issue, is there other major issues that people and councilmen or elected officials should address in Atlanta?
Absolutely. I think the income inequality, and that's something that Jeremy and I have talked about quite a few times when he was in Atlanta, but it's an issue that is kind of, I would say, that I really am passionate about, that has been a problem in Atlanta for years. And you see the poverty levels and the lack of wealth, even of homeowners, even of people who are longtime residents who own their homes. They're still cash poor.
Yeah.
And the wealth is not there. And what you're seeing is, with the level of displacement that's happening, it's directly due, in my opinion, to the lack of wealth and the poverty. Folks who are renting, as the rent goes up, these many folks are making $9-10 an hour. They get forced out and have to live further out in the suburbs. Then you have legacy homeowners who own their homes, who don't have as much wealth still, who are it's very hard for them to continue to stay in the city when the roof needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
And the pipes need to be replaced. And so the income inequality is one of the biggest issues as well that Mayor Dickens is obviously looking to address as well. But the council is going to move as well to try to introduce some legislation and really do as much as we can.
Yep.
Because the challenge is a lot of things should have been happening 12, 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And now we're scrambling as the values and the prices and everything continues to go up in Atlanta to do what we can to do right by the legacy homeowners and other people who are longtime residents of Atlanta so that they're not all displaced.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is already happening and continues to. So I think the income inequality and the affordable housing issue is something that is definitely going to need to be addressed. And that's probably as important as public safety, I would say.
And that's some of the issues you see across all the major cities across the country. I want to go into Keisha Lance Bottoms. I'm a huge fan of her. Like I've been following her when she was in time as mayor. There was part of me that was like, oh, I hope she can get the VP role. Nothing against Vice President Harris, but my mind's like, oh, I hope she can get the get strong interest in the VP role. And I'm a huge fan of her and what she's done as mayor of Atlanta. She's dealt with some difficult, and this is my personal opinion.
Yeah.
She dealt with some difficult tasks and had different challenges that she had to face. And I know she's no longer mayor. I'm hoping that she gets back into politics. I'm hoping that she continues to climb up the ladder. What's your thoughts on former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms?
So, from seeing it on the inside, I think that one thing I'll say is Mayor Bottoms was definitely somebody who respected council members and individuals that she worked with and had a more, I guess you could say she was much more open to the back and forth and respect, even though she was the mayor and had a lot of power like any mayor in Atlanta does, because with Mayor Reed, he was a bully. He disrespected people. It was just he was one of those individuals that he just was really confrontational. So she was not as confrontational. She was just a person that would have more back and forth. She used to be a council member as well. And so I would say that was something that was welcomed at City Hall. But I think the challenge for Mayor Bottoms, or former Mayor Bottoms at the time, was that she, I would say that City Hall fell off from getting the basics correct. When you're not able to deliver services like picking up people's trash on the regular, when, the debris and dumping is not being taken care of, that is going to cause a lot of other issues. And so I would say is that there were challenges with certain people in leadership in the administration addressing some of these core difficult issues. I think when it comes to her branding, when it comes to how she presented herself to the media and everything, she was very good with that. But the things that you need to do as mayor, the stuff that is outside of your appearances on CNN and media outlets, the stuff that really is difficult, the sanitation workers, having enough workers to be able to pick up trash on the regular, pick up debris on the regular, some of those issues regarding core city functions and services just fell off completely. And I think that was a challenge. I think she dealt with things that all mayors did when the pandemic first started and when we had a lot of protests going on. But I think it seemed as though she wasn't as concerned with these core difficult issues, separate from the communications aspect of what any mayor has to do.
Gotcha.
And so I think that was very frustrating to many people who are residents as well as people who are working at City Hall, and there was individuals who were in positions who should not have been. And I think that's kind of the challenge with her 4 years. But I don't blame her for not running again, because as you see, there were mayors in other cities who decided not to run for re-election because it is stressful. Her husband got COVID and was seriously ill. And there was a lot of things. I think that she still has children and has a husband, and, you know, it's stressful. It's been stressful on all of us. So I, you know, would say that, you know, it was a challenging time. And I think that she may get back into politics, but I think that it was probably best that if her heart wasn't in it, to continue to run, because she more than likely would have won re-election. It would have been a difficult re-election, but I believe she would have won. But I think that if your heart's not in it, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. And sometimes you just have to be honest with yourself, and maybe that's what happened with her. But I could see, her getting back into politics one day, but she might be completely disgusted with it, because it burns you out.
That's true.
It burns anyone out, whether you're an elected official or you're a consultant, because you get frustrated with the way things are. So we'll see.
Yeah. We'll see. Stay tuned.
So many thoughts, so many things, and I know we got to move on with time, but so many things and thoughts about Atlanta politics and what's going on with the city. I think just one thing I will say is, we were talking about Buckhead and that whole, secession movement and what have you. And that's so interesting to me, right? Because if you go back and you look at the history, when Buckhead was being annexed into the city, and I think it was by Hartsfield? I think it was by Hartsfield.
I believe so.
Yeah, under Hartsfield, Mayor Hartsfield, whom the airport is named after. It was a racial thing, right? They wanted to sort of dilute the control of the city a little bit, and so they annexed what was a predominantly white neighborhood and made it, part of the city, and they're wanting to, kind of get control. It's interesting because in this example, that race hasn't really been mentioned, but I still think it's at play. And
Absolutely.
We're seeing this in a lot of cities around the country where you have sort of these, areas that are on the periphery of cities, right? And they're, the socioeconomics obviously plays into it, because Buckhead is a very, I don't want to say elite, but it's a very affluent area, very affluent part. And so you're seeing these affluent areas want to say, you know what, we want to distance ourselves from the city. And a lot of times the cities are predominantly Black, predominantly minority, areas. And so it's interesting to me how that history has sort of changed and shifted over time. I think I read something that was talking about, I think it was an Atlanta Journal-Constitution article. It spoke about how a lot of the Buckhead residents, Black, white, all races, were saying that the tax dollars, their tax dollars are not being used by the city of Atlanta as they should be, and yet they're giving so much money to the city of Atlanta. So that's a real interesting thing, man. And there's so many other things you can talk about. You know what I'm saying? With
and I'll add one thing in there, and I think the issue to me, and to leapfrog for what you said, is the fact that in Georgia, which I think is a problem, the way the state law is set up, it allows individuals who have this belief to create organizations and create cities. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think in many cases it's bad, because the issue is, if Buckhead became a city, it ever does become a city, they're going to have the same problems they already have. Yeah. It's just going to be another layer of government. And we've seen this in many metro Atlanta cities that have recently popped up. They went through all the steps they have to become a city. And then years down the road, you're dealing with the same bureaucracy. Yeah. You're dealing with the same corruption. And basically, you just have another layer of it. And so the argument, which was pretty effective, and which is why many Buckhead residents were against cityhood, is that all this is going to do is create another layer. They're not going to be any safer. Right. They're not going to be any safer. You're just going to now have your own police department that's going to be dealing with the same thing. And now you just have another layer of government, because the city of Stonecrest is one example. Mm-hmm. that's a city east in DeKalb County that was unincorporated DeKalb. They did everything they needed to do become a city because they were tired of the DeKalb County government not utilizing their tax dollars. They created the city of Stonecrest. They've had so many issues with their former mayor, Jason Larry, who pushed the cityhood movement and became their first mayor. Jason Larry was just indicted by the feds for stealing COVID money.
Oh, man.
Wow.
And using some of those emergency COVID dollars to pay for his vacation home renovations. So you see how this can lead to individuals who push cityhood, one of them become the mayor or the city councilman, and to enrich themselves. So a lot of these things are the cityhood movement has just got out of control. Gotcha. So that's one thing I wanted to add.
Did he get them PPP loans too?
I wouldn't be surprised, but here's the issue with Jason Larry. During that initial election, he had a long track record of being a crook, and I'll just be honest. So the residents knew of his shady character, but because he was the one who spearheaded the movement, got the nonprofit created and worked with the legislators to introduce the legislation to even allow the residents of that area to vote to see if they wanted to become a city, they said, oh, well, he needs to be our mayor. And as you see, what he had been involved in previously, which was already known, he got in trouble again. And now he's more than likely going to go down because, you know, the feds don't bring charges that they can't get you on, that where they're not going to get a guilty plea. So he had to resign over the last, since about 2 months ago, he resigned after he was charged.
Wow. All right.
So that, speaking of, you know, politics and races, that's a good little segue into our next topic for discussion. We wanted to talk about some, I guess, notable key races that are going on right now and your thoughts on that. So are there any races in particular that we should watch out for?
Yeah, across the country too.
Yeah, so as far as local mayoral races, I would say in Louisville, we know what all happened with Breonna Taylor.
Yeah.
Rest in peace to her. And they will be electing their new mayor this year.
Okay.
And I think that all the issues that they've had with policing in Louisville, criminal justice issues, they have a lot of issues with poverty. Okay. It will be very interesting to see who ends up being elected. Now, Craig Greenberg is a candidate for mayor, and he's the front runner. He has raised $1.1 million, which is more than all the other candidates combined. But the crazy thing about Greenberg is somebody tried to assassinate him 3 or 4 months ago. Someone came to his campaign office and shot up the campaign office. And so it's a lot going on in Louisville. I mean, I guess it's so things are so crazy nowadays that maybe that's just what happens. But it's nuts that has happened. And ironically, the former police chief in Atlanta is now the Louisville police chief. So there's a lot of dynamics at play here. So I think that is a race that we need to pay close attention to.
Okay.
I need to look into Greenberg a little bit more, but I think if he is in fact a front runner and maybe has the best chance of winning, reforming the LMPD, because they still need reform, is going to be critical. Now, Ja'Cory Arthur is a recently elected city councilman in Louisville. I think he's been in office for about 2 or 3 years now. He's a strong brother, man. He is he's a strong reparation supporter, and he was actually able to push through a reparations resolution that was passed and signed by the mayor, Greg Fisher, that calls on the federal government to pay reparations to Black Americans. And so he's been pushing a lot on the city council level, but I think whoever becomes the next mayor of Louisville, given the track record and the protests and everything happening, they're going to have to hopefully forge a different path forward regarding police misconduct. And even in Austin, they're going to be electing a new mayor in Austin. So I think that's another city to pay attention to. So you have Senator Kirk Watson, who used to be the mayor of Austin, who is a state senator now, who's going to be running again But I thought it was interesting that he says that he wants to address homelessness, public safety, and systematic racism. So we'll see. I mean, I think that it's
sounds good.
It sounds good.
Yeah, right.
And if he really has some thoughts on that, because I'm sure you all are both well aware of the rising housing costs in Austin and how folks have been displaced.
Yes, black folks moved out of traditional East Austin because we both went to UT Austin. We seen it, and we seen it like over the moved years. Out. And then Pflugerville, that you got people moving out, and it is heavily gentrified in Austin.
Yeah. So, do you guys think that there's anything that a new mayor can do, or being as the fact that you all went to school there, what do you think a mayor can do, given the fact it's a tech hub? And
so to that point, I'll just say about that. I think the fact that it is a tech hub, or that's the designated tech hub for the state of Texas, right? It makes it difficult. Any places that you see that are heavily invested in tech, as liberal, I think, as tech would have us believe they are. In a lot of cases, they are in terms of, politically how they vote and how they, are represented. It's not always a good thing for black people, right? Take a look at San Fran. You know what I'm saying? It is hard for many, black families, black individuals to earn an honest living in San Fran and live in the city of San Francisco. Like it's virtually impossible, as it is with just anybody, because, tech comes with so much money. They generate so much revenue every year, and it just makes property values just skyrocket because they're willing to pay whatever it is, you know what I'm saying, for property. So that's it's a hard thing when you start having this influx of tech professionals and people that are tech oriented, and they're coming into neighborhoods and they're willing to pay, way more than the property is worth. And so it inflates the property values. And now the person the native, Austinite can't really afford to live in what was traditionally their neighborhood. Right. And, you talk about public policy and what can a mayor do in order to address that. They're kind of in a conundrum, right? Because they want to encourage tech to come to the city as well, because there are other jobs that it brings to the city, and it does increase the tax base, and it does, help develop and grow a city. So that's a tough one.
It's tough because I think when we were there back in 2006, I think it was black population was around 8% in Austin.
Yeah.
And I know traditionally, black folks in like East Austin, and we used to live in the Riverside area, going other area, and that Riverside area is
so different now.
It's different now. And so now I don't know, because with black folks being displaced, one, and decreasing black population, to me, unless you're gonna, like I said, work with those companies and try to find ways to diversify the people that live in here, and especially when you have all the companies and you have people coming out from outside moving into Austin, what are some of those efforts to help help get not only the company more diverse, but also get more residents diverse? What are we doing to protect people who are and been in those traditional historical households? Are we creating special tax incentives or to help maybe freeze the appraisal rates? The property tax rates. Those are things maybe I'm hoping that Austin can do and to really get things moving forward. But I think, in my opinion, probably a lot of damage has already been done, right? And so, like I said, I haven't lived in Austin in a while, but it's just heavily gentrified, and we'll see what he says. Let's see what whoever wins mayor, let's see what they do.
I'll say one thing that I've seen being around city government. So Texas does have. And this is actually, I think, through the legislator, through the government code, what are called economic empowerment zones, right? Mm-hmm. That cities can sort of use to encourage, more investment and what have you. So, I can see a scenario where Austin would sort of earmark certain parts of the city and use the economic empowerment zones that are, statutorily already kind of, I don't want to say mandated, but it's a possibility. They can use that, but they can use it to try to encourage local business and local investment from entrepreneurs, right? Mm-hmm. And they can do things to make it more attractive, for minority-owned businesses as well. Yeah. And so that would be a way that they could. I don't know if that really stops the movement away from, minorities that have traditionally been located and situated in Austin, but I think that would provide some relief to where you'll start to see more involvement and more influence from the people that have been living in Austin for, the last few decades, you know what I'm saying, who got family, generations have been in Austin, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that could be something.
Yeah. I was going to ask, is there any other races that people should follow? I'm excited actually about some of the races in Georgia. Stacey Abrams,
absolutely.
And I saw Stacey Abrams. I didn't watch it appear on Star Trek, and she's all over the place. Yeah. I mean, she's living her best life. But Stacey's the one to fall. I'm hoping that she wins. I mean, she wins. I think this is her time. Fingers crossed. But it's going to be interesting to see when Kemp versus Perdue. That's going to be intriguing to see who comes out. I think it'll be Kemp versus Stacey Abrams part 2. Let's see who wins there. That race I'm interested in. I'm interested in Herschel Walker. I'm hoping he comes out. Herschel versus Raphael Warnock.
Yeah, that's going to be dope.
Yeah, that's going to generate a lot of energy in Georgia, and that's major implications there. So those some of the races, at least I say in Georgia, I'm following. I mean, there's going to be races going on in Pennsylvania, people watching Connor Lamb. There's going to be Mark Kelly in Arizona. What's your thoughts of any other races?
My thoughts in Georgia. So let's talk about that. We actually have been delving into that in our company podcast. But I think that Brian Kemp, I was a little bit worried. We were looking at the polling. Mm-hmm. And about a month ago or more, the race was very tight when you looked at the Republican polling when the voters were asked or were reminded that Donald Trump endorsed Perdue. Kemp's lead shrunk significantly, but he's been gaining steam now, and David Perdue is kind of flailing, if you will, because right now, in some polls, Kemp is up from between 5 and 15 points on Perdue, because I think that David Perdue, some see him as attacking Kemp on things that he otherwise would support. And he just has to attack him on various issues like the tax credits he gave Rivian. So Rivian is, building a new plant for the electric trucks when he's been a CEO of a major company and he's all for tax breaks and now he's not. So he's just he's really not positioning himself well. And I think Brian Kemp is at least, I think he may survive this primary if the polling is correct, even though many of the Trumpers do not like Kemp based on some things that happened during the election. Mm-hmm. But I think he will survive. Now, Stacey Abrams, I believe, is still well positioned in a head-to-head matchup. Now, I believe it'll be a little bit harder for her to turn out voters at the clip that she needs to, not because of anything she's done, but because so much has changed in this country in 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I think that she can most certainly win. I think her message is going to have to be she might have to get a little bit more specific on the policies that she's going to do specifically for Black voters. And I'm not saying that the voter turnout is going to fall off, but just in case you have people who have lost their jobs, lost loved ones, she may have to really go a little bit harder and aggressive to ensure that turnout is high. Mm-hmm. Turnout could be high whether she does anything more or not policy-wise. But I think she may have to get a little bit more aggressive in her messaging and what she's willing to do specifically for Black voters. But I'm not saying that is insufficient now. It's just that I wouldn't assume anything in this environment. Now, there could be just as many Republicans who don't turn out, just like they didn't turn out and vote for Kelly Loeffler, because one of the big things for Warnock winning when he beat Loeffler, because we advised the PAC who did a lot of attack ads on Kelly Loeffler. there's tens of thousands of Republicans across the state of Georgia who simply didn't vote. Mm-hmm. They did not turn out in a runoff. Mm-hmm. Had they, Warnock would have lost. Right. So the black turnout was important, very important. I'm not saying it wasn't. But there were 30, 40,000 Republicans who just didn't turn out. And so if they don't turn out, I think Stacey, because they're mad at Kemp, if Trump tells them don't vote. but I think that they're like, I wouldn't assume that, because let's say they do turn out, then she's going to need black voter turnout to go through the roof. It has. I think she has to overperform, and her numbers were great last time. So I think that's going to have to happen. Now, Warnock and Herschel Walker, I don't think Herschel Walker is qualified to be a senator. I don't think he has the range. But the way the polls look, they're basically tied, or he's up 5 points on Warnock. So I think Warnock is going to have the same strategy as Stacey Abrams, and I think he's done a fairly good job. But he's going to have to lean into some of the policies that will excite black voters, because Herschel Walker is going to win his primary.
Guess was it Gary Black, right?
Yes, he's up 40 points.
Oh man,
in some polling. Huge. Oh yeah, it's
a wrap. It's a wrap.
So a lot of those Republicans who thought the election was rigged, who didn't turn out in the runoff when Warnock faced Loeffler, will vote for Herschel Walker, and so Warnock has to, again, the black voter turnout has to be through the roof. Yep. And I'm hearing Herschel Walker may attempt to eat into the black support by just doing slightly better in Metro Atlanta suburbs with lots of black voters. He's never going to win them, but if he does, 3% better, 4% better.
He's going to go after the black man. He can't get black women.
He is. And so I think that engaging black male voters is going to be critical for Stacey Abrams and Warnock. They have to go past whatever they thought they were going to do. Yeah. That's just it. And so I think, and then for the gun control issue, constitutional carry Brian Kemp is pushing that now. It passed the House or the Senate, so we'll see what happens with that. I think Stacey Abrams needs to stay away from that debate completely. Warnock also. Just don't even bring it up. If somebody asks a question, you have to answer it. But it would be, I think Kemp is laying a trap, because you know the data on the rising black gun ownership.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, I personally believe there's quite a few black voters in Georgia who are Democrats who support constitutional carry.
Yeah, for sure.
I see the pros and the cons of it. I'm a gun owner. I don't necessarily even touch that issue, because I'm fine with the way the laws are currently in Georgia. But there's quite a few black voters and black folks who I have seen online that support that.
Yeah.
So you don't want to
split the fact.
Yeah, they're Democrats though.
Yeah.
So you just want to, I would say, avoid that issue. She's not going to gain any more votes by coming out aggressively against that. I think she just needs to
play it cool.
Avoid it. Don't even bring it up. Sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
When Glenn Youngkin ran for governor of Virginia, he never campaigned with Donald Trump one time.
Yep.
Because he knew, got to keep this guy, keep him on the side.
He wrote the playbook.
He wrote the playbook, and that's what you have to do. You have to understand some of these hot button issues can really blow up in your face. So sometimes you just need to avoid certain things.
Dash leads to Beto O'Rourke. That was part what hurt him. When he talking about, I'm going to take your AR-15s, people didn't forget that. Wait a minute. Even black folks, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And I like Beto. In Texas. Yes. I like Beto. I'm a fan of Beto. But when he made those comments, people are like, ooh, Beto, I don't know about this.
Yeah, what do you... Yeah.
Yeah, so now he's running a second time around. You know, we do have a constitutional carry, law that's passed, right, in Texas. So now, it's, you have Beto versus Greg Abbott. And so Beto's already ran, for U.S. Senate against Ted Cruz in 2018. Then ran for president, didn't work out, right? And now, we're talking about third time. Let's see what happens. He's running against Greg Abbott. What's your thoughts on the race? What's your thoughts about the political landscape in Texas?
I think that the infrastructure on the Democratic end is probably not where it needs to be to turn out the voters necessary. I think that, with Texas, it's the same thing that you're seeing in a lot of states where, due to President Biden's approval ratings going down, you're going to have turnout through the roof in states that are traditionally conservative. And I think the hard part is to match that, you've got to have black turnout in Texas through the roof, right? But I'm not sure Beto O'Rourke is capable of increasing the turnout to that level. And I think it had to have been a situation like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, where she had the New Georgia Project, and they were working for like 8 to 10 years before she even ran. Yeah. So you have to put in that work. And if that work hasn't been put in here in Texas, it's almost impossible given the political winds changing for Democrats. And I think the hard part is we all went to college, but I feel like in the political arena, when it comes to consultants, you have these college-educated folks who have views personally that are kind of outside the mainstream, and I feel like they influence what they're advising a candidate to do. For example, the taking it with the AR-15s, I'm sure there was some advisor who personally feels that that's a good idea. and again, if some Democratic circles, they believe it should be banned, right? And on Twitter, and people say, well, it should be banned. And I'm sure he thought that was a great idea. But when you guys know Texas, you guys are from Texas, you went to school here. Yep. It was clear that quite a few people in Texas thought that was a horrible idea. And so you have some of these advisors, and this is why candidates diversifying the consultants they hire is so critical. When you don't have people at the table who can have some common sense proposals and strategies to tell you that this idea is terrible, well, then you're going to go with a horrible idea and strategy. And so I think that's what hurts some of these candidates, is that they always hire the same consulting firms. They don't want to hire us because we're new to the scene or we're not, but we have more of a window into what people want to see on the ground. Because I think one thing that separates our firm is I don't hang out with a lot of political people. It just in terms of being in a bubble. I work with a lot of residents on the west side of Atlanta. I see what they tell me. I take that in. And that's what helps us develop our strategy. So we're not developing a strategy. Yeah. We're not people who only talk to consultants or politicians, and that's the only people in our circle. So we have no idea what the people are talking about. We have a good perspective on what residents, people who've been ignored, people who've been marginalized, what they're concerned with. So that helps us to shape our strategy. So I think candidates are going to have to hire more people like that. So I think it's going to be difficult for Beto O'Rourke, is my opinion. If for no other reason than the political winds are changing for Democrats right now. It's a rough environment. So I want him to win. But I just don't know if that infrastructure is in place.
So, I mean, everything you said is pretty much my sentiments exactly. I think, and we've talked about this.
Yeah, we have.
The infrastructure with the Democratic Party. And mind you, just for the record, I am not a Democrat, right? I do have to say that. I'm very critical of the Democrats. I think the Democrats have taken the black vote for granted, as I do think they just take the minority vote in general for granted. And it's not to say that I'm anti-Democrat, but I see a lot of things with the party that I feel like, from the black perspective, if we are trying to leverage our political might and will to get certain things done, it's not in our best interest to always vote for the Democrats. And I'm not a Republican either. You know what I'm saying? I would say I'm an independent, but I definitely know that we have an interest in understanding what's going on. But it's the infrastructure. It's the infrastructure.
It is.
And Beto has done a good job. I mean, you know more about this than me, but he's done a good job of kind of developing his own systems to sort of, engage with voters and track, what voters are doing and that type of thing. But ultimately, your party plays a large role in a race that is so expansive, like a governor's race.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because Texas has 254 counties.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you're looking at, what's going on in West Texas is not the same thing that's going on in Harris County
or East Texas,
or East Texas or Tarrant County or Dallas. You know what I'm saying? So it takes a very, very it takes a very focused effort to strategically look at areas and figure out what's going to work in that area in order to get the vote out, in order to get people excited and energized about, voting for you. And then, like you said, some of these little things that they do, in Texas, everybody has a gun. I mean, it's just the reality.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna say things that are, anti-Second Amendment rights, you've got to realize that with a lot of your base, there's going to be a pushback.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
That's just the reality. And that's just knowing the voters here. Just knowing, you know what I'm saying? It's not a, a crazy thing when you really just break it down. So those are my thoughts, man.
And then for me, before we go into break, is, it's me being part of other Democratic clubs and been involved in some of the spaces. Alan, like you mentioned, infrastructure. You guys mentioned infrastructure is a big thing. I've been hearing for so many years, oh, Texas turning blue, Texas turning blue. I'm gonna quit saying that, and because it's not. I mean, that's just, I'm gonna say it. But because there hasn't been a dedicated effort to build the infrastructure, and Beto has been the closest to it, and Beto has gradually built the infrastructure, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done in East Texas. How do you talk to people in East Texas? I mean, that's where you got traditional Black folks, right? In East Texas. That's a bedrock there. What are some efforts to build that infrastructure there? What are, because some people think, well, we'll just focus on major cities, right? And we'll be fine. But where Beto lost was in the rural areas.
It's the rural areas. He got crushed.
He got crushed in the rural areas. Look at the numbers.
Yeah.
And so what are we doing to build up the rural areas? What are we doing to put in the infrastructure in place to build those voters? Knowing that it's going to take 5, 6, 7 years plus to build it, rather than keep saying turn Texas blue. You got the infrastructure and then the messaging too. I sit back and I was watching a lot of commercials on the Republican side. The messaging is always on point. I mean, I don't agree with the messaging.
Yeah, but it's consistent.
But the way they do it, it's pretty impressive, right? So you see this common topic: secure the border.
Yep.
Anti-CRT against woke.
The woke agenda. The woke agenda.
Against woke agenda. Secure the border. Yes, anti-CRT. You just talking about, we against defund the police, but they have the same topics that circulate across. I see different Republicans there. Stay on that certain message. I mean, when our comptroller talking about we're gonna go against Biden and secure border, I'm like,
how are you involved with
how
that?
are you involved? You're a comptroller.
Yeah.
But it's just that same consistent message, like you're saying. And then on the Democrat side, they don't have that strong message. They have the message that some of the consultants give, but they don't have the message that it takes to that the mainstream people, the everyday residents, that they care and they're touching it, that impacts them. They need to touch and feel. And so that's some of the dynamics that we're gonna have to the Democrats it's gonna work to, because until then,
gonna be in trouble.
And I think
some of the messaging is, and we do a lot of copywriting and messaging, but my other thing is, this is why I'm such a big supporter of reparations, or at least Democrats being bold enough to say we're gonna make movement on it. Because if you're not offering any policy that's gonna change anybody's life, it's actually very hard for a consultant to create a message off of you offering nothing but performative policy. You need to be willing to go bold so the consultants can then come up with all this creative type of messaging which will turn out the voters.
Yeah.
What are you offering Black people in Texas, specifically in East Texas, to improve their lives? You can't just have this general message, because what are you offering them? Why should they turn out to vote? And I think Democrats have to decide whether they're willing to go hard for Black voters, proposed policy that can then be turned into content, easy bits of content to inspire people. Because what they're offering now isn't enough.
Nope.
It's not enough. And I mean, they have to decide. They think that people are just going to turn out.
They're not.
Because LeBron James comes down and does a rally.
Right.
But it's not, that doesn't work anymore. It used to. It really did. But I think we're now at the point where people are wanting more substance. I'm not saying they want complex. You still have to have strong messaging, but they actually want substance. Because if they check their Wells Fargo online bank account and it's not pretty, and it hasn't been pretty, don't think that they don't know.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to be excited. So I think Democrats have to really make some hard decisions in the coming months and years about what they're willing to push.
No, I agree. So we get back from our break. We're going to talk about candidates, especially Black candidates, and the dynamic of campaigning. I know you probably have some advice to definitely share to help candidates who aspire to be in the political space. So please stay tuned with us on the Shot of E&J podcast.